Oh, sure, okay, he said. He sounded a little disappointed, but how sorry could I feel for him? After all, he had a normal lunch in his lunchbox and a best friend back home. He was pretty lucky. Me, I didn't even want to think about the ridiculous thing my mother had packed me for lunch. And it was so depressing to think that someone who had a silly name and walked around dressed up the way he was could have a best friend when I didn't have one. See you later, I said as I picked up my lunchbox. Okay, he said. When I got outside, I found a bench far away from the basketball court and opened my lunchbox. As soon as I saw the contents, I was glad I decided not to open up in front of Fenimore. There was a tortilla stuffed with Raisin Bran cereal, 3 slices of American cheese, which she had cut out in the shapes of the letter Guy, and a can of guava juice. Occasionally, my mother puts in something good for dessert, but this time she packed a long, hard, skinny thing covered in brown sticky stuff, which was coated with tan crumbs. I had no idea what it was. As usual, she'd written a note and taped it to the inside of the lid. Dear Geisy, hope you like my latest invention. I call it Rabbit Delight. Don't worry, it's not made of rabbit. It's a carrot covered with butterscotch sauce and peanuts. Enjoy. Love, Mom. I unrolled the tortilla and dumped out the Raisin Bran. Then I put the cheese inside it, rolled it back up, and ate it. I tried the guava juice, but it was repulsive, so I threw it. And the Rabbit Delight in the trash. It wasn't exactly a satisfying meal, but believe it or not, I've had worse. Sometimes the only normal thing in my lunchbox was the napkin. When I look up, I see that Fenimore was standing near the basketball court, looking toward me. I felt sort of bad because I told him I was going out there to play ball, and he could probably tell that I just wanted to eat my lunch alone. He raised one hand and kind of half waved at me. I didn't wave back. I wasn't going to let my guilty conscience talk me into making the mistake of befriending this kid. My mother's public displays of wackiness already kept me plenty busy trying to maintain my image just as a normal, regular 7-year-old boy. I couldn't afford to rock the boat. I wanted a best friend more than anything in the world, but the one I'd been wishing for every time I blew out the candles was definitely not Fenimore Adams. Chapter 4. When we got back to the classroom after lunch, Miss Hunn rang her bell for the second time that same October day. Boys and girls, settle down, please. As you know, our second grade play, The Princess and the Pea, begins rehearsals this afternoon. Up until this morning, we had absolutely no volunteers for the costume committee, but I'm very pleased to announce that we now have an enthusiastic chairperson who has volunteered to create original costumes for the entire production. Isn't that exciting news? Who volunteered? Asked Frankie. Mrs. Strain, Guy's mother, said Miss Hunn. Oh, man, I said to myself, could this day get any worse? As many of you guys know, Miss Hunn continued, Guy's mother is a very, creative person, and I'm certain that her costumes will make a wonderful addition to our production. She's creative, all right. Did anybody see what she did last 4th of July? Kevin said. She's nuts. I was about to disagree with him, but what she had done was wrap red, white, and blue crepe paper all the way around her station wagon and herself and drove through town, honking her horn and waving sparklers out the window. To make matters worse, she convinced my father to dress up as the Statue of Liberty. He stood up on the passenger seat with his head sticking out of the sunroof, wearing an old green bathrobe and a cut-up wastebasket crown on his head. That's nothing. What about what she wore to the first grade class picnic? Said Lana Zuckerman, the tallest, meanest girl in the class. Remember that? Actually, she was the tallest kid, boy or girl, in the whole grade, and she would have been the meanest too, except that Kevin had that position filled. If you had told me that a few years later my parents would got divorced and my mother would have to get remarried to Lana Zuckerman's father, I would have found the nearest cliff and thrown myself off of it. But anyway, Lana was on a roll, reminding everybody about how embarrassing class picnic was the year before. We all saw your bare butthole, Guy, she laughed, and so did everybody else who knew what she was talking about. At the picnic, my mother had showed up wearing a vest she had made by taking a bunch of baby photos, punching holes in the corners, and sewing them together with yarn. I don't mean just any baby photos. I'm talking photographs of me sitting on the potty, having my diaper changed, and rolling around in the backyard wearing nothing but a big bird bib. My bare buttonhole, as Lana called it, had been on display for everyone to see. Class, that's enough now. As I said, we're all most fortunate to have Miss String on our board for the production. When I got home that afternoon, my mother was in the kitchen frosting a cake. Hi, Honey Bunch, she called as I came in the back door and dropped my bag in the corner. Why didn't you ask me if I wanted you to make costumes for the play? I asked. Well, why wouldn't you want me to? She paused for a second with a rubber spatula full of chocolate frosting in her hand. You can't do a play without costumes, and Miss Hunn practically kissed my feet when I volunteered. I looked down at my mother's feet. Her toenails, each one painted a different color, were sticking out of the fronts of her tropical fruit sandals. Just one of her many exotic creations, she had taken a pair of regular white shoes and hot glued plastic fruit, strawberries, grapes, and pineapple chunks all over them. I tried to imagine Miss Hunn kissing them. This production of The Princess and the Pea is going to be like any production ever done before, she announced proudly. I believe that, I said. Let me guess. Are you planning to hot glue fruit all over everybody? I don't know about fruit, she said, but maybe some little green peas would be cute. I was kidding, Mom, I said. My mother smiled and handed me one of the beaters. I ran my tongue along the chocolate edge. Then I gagged and hurried to the sink to spit out what I thought was frosting, but what I knew the second it collided with my taste buds was definitely not. What is that? I said as soon as I was able to speak. Chocolate pate, she said. What's pate? I asked as I grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and swished it out of my mouth. Liver, she said. Liver? I said. You're making a liver cake? It's not supposed to be dessert. It's more of an appetizer. I made it up, she said. Yeah, I can tell. I tried to wipe the last of the sickening flavor off my tongue with a wet paper towel. Next time, warn me, will you? I'm sorry, Guysie. How about a cookie? What's in them? Brussels sprouts? I asked. No surprises, I promise, she said as she opened the cookie jar and pulled out a cookie. Milk? She asked. I nodded and she poured me a glass of cold milk. We heard a car door slam and my father was home. Wookums, my mother called as she ran to the door to greet him. My father's real name was William, but he couldn't say it when he was a kid, so he called himself Wookums instead. It probably stuck because it actually fit him much better than William. What's the wonderful smell? He asked, whiffing the air in the kitchen. Kind of chocolatey, yet at the same time, do I detect a hint of liver? It's chocolate pate. I invented it myself, my mother said proudly. How exotic, just like you, my little dump truck, my father said, kissing my mother's cheek with a loud smack. I often wondered what it would be like to have a father who called his wife darling instead of dump truck. Not to mention a mother who knew that liver and chocolate didn't go together. How was your day at school, Guy Chick? My father asked. Tell him the big news, my mother asked excitedly. What big news? I asked. About the play, silly, she prompted. My class is putting on a play, I said flatly. It hardly seemed like big news to me. It's The Princess and the Pea, and I'm doing the costumes, my mother declared. Fantastic, my father said enthusiastically. And what part are you playing, Guy? I'm a shrub, I said. A shrub? My mother asked, wrinkling up her brow. I don't remember any shrubbery in the version of the story I read. Do you, Wuck? I don't think I ever read it, my father replied. I'm strictly a sci-fi guy. The shrubs were Miss Hunn's idea. Since there aren't enough real parts to go around, some of us are playing bushes that grow outside the castle walls, I explained. Did you try for one of the real parts, Guysie? Wouldn't you rather be a person than a bush? My mother asked. Nah, I don't like drama. The shrubs don't have to do anything except sit there looking bushy, and that sounds right to me. Who else is playing a shrub? Dad asked. A bunch of us, all boys. Max, Greg, Alex, Henry, and Fenimore. Fenimore, my mother said. Yeah, he's the new kid. Fenimore's a very unusual name. What is he like? She asked. Like his name, I replied. Unusual. Maybe he'll turn out to be your new best friend, said my mother with a big smile. No, I said, that's not going to happen. How can you say that? You've barely even met him, my father said. The most interesting people often turn out to be the ones who take a little longer to get to know. Don't you think, Dumpers? Absolutely, my mother agreed. Trust me, Fenimore and I are not going to be friends. For one thing, I don't want an unusual friend, I said, picking up a book bag and heading upstairs to start my homework. When I find a best friend, I want him to be regular, just like me. I thought about Fenimore later that night as I lay in bed trying to go to sleep. Why couldn't the new kid have been someone with a normal name, like Alex or David or Sam, and a regular haircut and clothes? Why couldn't he have been someone I could have talked to about stuff, share secrets with, invite for sleepovers, and all the other things best friends do together? Why couldn't he have been just right instead of, well, Fenimore? Chapter 5. The rehearsals were for our second grade production of The Princess and the Pea were pretty boring, especially for those of us who were playing shrubs. Lana and Kevin were the king and queen, so they had a lot of lines to rehearse. Nico de Palma, who everyone thought was so cute on the account of his dimples and wavy black hair, was playing the prince. Then there were the princesses, who were played by the girly girls in class, Autumn, Kendra, Sawyer, and Grace. They had speeches to practice too. All the other characters had a few lines here and there, but the shrubs didn't say anything at all. Miss Hunn suggested that we might want to make up a little bush dance to do while we make our parts more interesting. But we took a vote, and it unanimously decided that we should be a non-dancing variety of shrubbery. Suit yourselves, she said, and went back to read through the script. I spent most of the second rehearsal staring at Bobo Smith, who was playing a castle guard. He was supposed to say, "Halt! Who goes there?" whenever anyone approached the castle, but he wasn't following along in the script, so he missed his cues every time. Each time he messed up, Lana would kick him under the table, and Baba would jump and say, "What did I do?" in a high squeaky voice. Lana quickly lost patience with him. "If I were really the queen and you were my guard, I'd fire you so fast your head would spin," she grumped. Forget about making it spin. Why don't we have save time and just behead him instead, suggested King Kevin. Great idea, Your Majesty, said Lana. Who needs a guard anyway? We could just booby-trap the castle gate to keep out the undesirables. Far out. Strap some dynamite to it, and whoever shows up, kaboom, Kevin said, making explosive spinning noises with his big, ugly, wet mouth. All I can say it's a good thing you two aren't really the king and queen around here, said Miss Hun with a sigh. I have a feeling more than one of us would be walking around with a head on our shoulders. Bobo didn't seem to be aware that he had been insulted. He was completely oblivious as usual. He'd been in my class every year since kindergarten, and he seemed to get stranger and stranger with each year. While I watched him that day, I remember he was doing something bizarre. He'd pull out one of his eyebrows really hard, and whenever he managed to pull out a hair, he'd put it into the palm of his hand, close his eyes, and blow on it. Then he'd study his hand really carefully to see if the hair was still there. If it was, he'd do it all over again. Making wishes, whispered Fenimore, who was sitting behind me. Huh? I said, not sure what he was talking about. Who's making wishes? The goofy kid in classes, Bobo. He's making wishes on his eyebrows, he said. Really? I watched Bobo, who had just pulled out another hair. He placed it on his palm, closed his eyes. His lips moved a little like he was saying something to himself. Then he blew on the hair and checked to see if it was gone. See, if the hair's gone after he blows on it, the wish comes true, Fenimore explained. Just then, while we were both looking at him, Bobo stuck his finger way up his nose and started digging for gold, as they say. Sheesh, said Fenimore, flinching at the sight. I guess maybe he was wishing for a tissue and it didn't come true. I laughed out loud and Miss Hun shot me a look over the top of her glasses. Fenimore immediately stood up. Excuse us for being rude, ma'am. We didn't mean to bother you. It won't happen again. Miss Hun looked kind of surprised. I'd never seen anybody do what Fenimore had just done. I guess she hadn't either. He fessed up and apologized without even trying to deny it first. Miss Hun smiled and nodded and went back to work. Wow, are you always polite? I whispered. Who, me? Listen to this. He tucked his chin down and swallowed air. Then he let out a loose, long, rumbling belch. As he burps, he moved his lips to form words, the letters of the alphabet. He ran out of steam or rather a belch around letter P. It was all amazing and gross and funny. All in all, pretty great. Rude, I said appreciatively. Jumper rude, he said back. This time I was careful to cover my laughter with a fake coughing fit. Miss Hun looked up again, but she didn't say anything. Maybe we should try on our eyebrows that this stupid rehearsal would end already, I said when I'd recovered enough to speak. He smiled and nodded, and we both tugged on our eyebrows at the same time. We closed our eyes and blew the hairs. When I opened my eyes, the hair was gone. And right then the final bell rang. I looked over at Fenimore and he grinned. Guess it works, huh? Guy wire, he said. Guy wire, I said, repeating what sounded like he'd said. Yeah, guy, he said, pointing to me. Wire. Oh, you mean guy. I finally understood. Well, what does wire mean? Wire, like a telephone pole, he said. Oh, you mean wire? He nodded. Guy Wire? I said. Yeah, Guy Wire, he said, stretching his mouth around the words in order to change his accent and make it sound more the way it did when I said it. What's a guy wire? I asked. It's like a support wire that goes out sideways on radio towers to keep them from falling over, you know? No, I said. Sure you do. They go out sideways, sort of at an angle like this. He held up his hands to try to demonstrate, but it didn't help. I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about and why he was calling me that. And why he was trying to say I was skinny like a wire or something? That's kind of insulting, especially coming from someone who had helmet hair. I don't get it, I said. There's nothing to get, really. It's not supposed to mean anything. I just thought it might make some sort of cool nickname because, well, you know, because it has Guy already built into it and all, he said as he hoisted his bag onto his shoulder. Oh, I said. If you don't like it, though, I won't call you that. I'll come up with something else if you want, he said. See ya. Yeah, see ya, Fenimore, I said as I watched him leave. I stood there for a minute thinking. I was pretty surprised. I mean, my mother calls me Guyzy and my father calls me Guy Chick, but nobody outside the family had ever given me a nickname before. Why would Fenimore want to give me a nickname? Guy Wire, huh? Now that I thought about it, it did have a nice ring to it.